All right. Good morning, Doug. Let's talk about what happened this day in history.
Well, as is my wont, I got a dog come to visit just now. It's perhaps not very professional on my part to have dogs wandering around as we're talking about serious intellectual things. Anyway, I picked out somewhat arbitrarily. No, I can't play with you now. Um, Four things in history. The first thing that popped up was on this day in 2016, 8 years ago, we had the second largest mass shooting in American history. And that was at the Pulse nightclub in northern Florida. Was it Orlando? Where a chap who is the son of Afghan immigrants and very involved in jihadi type things. He was on various watch lists because of the people he was hanging around with and the websites he was visiting. Bought a high capacity semi-automatic rifle and a Glock and killed 49 people at this LGBTQ whatever trans nightclub, and also wounded about 50 some others that actually, when you're wounded with a 223, which most of them were hit with, you may have a real permanent problem. So permanently disabled. Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting because they never really got into why this guy went wild. Was it because he was a Muslim? Was it because he was gay and wasn't accepted by they talk about what happened, but not why it happened. I haven't found that anywhere, quite frankly.
It seems true of all mass shootings in the U.S. unless it's politically convenient for the motivation to come out. They hide it. Like there was recently a trans, shooter who had a big manifesto. I think it was in Nashville, if I recall, and they wouldn't release the manifesto because it didn't fit within the political narrative. So I think if it doesn't, you never know the why.
Yeah, and of course, these trans people, I really believe that they're technically, it's not a technical term, but it's a factual term. I think they're really all crazy. They're really very, so deeply unhappy with who they are that they actually try to change themselves physically. And most of them will wind up suicides, but I don't doubt there are going to be a lot of mass shootings and things of that nature from trans people. Well, I guess you're not supposed to call them trannies anymore. They're supposed to be trans people. I don't know. I don't care, quite frankly. So anyway, mass shootings. And of course, talking about that big one a few years ago in Las Vegas, where hundreds of people were wounded, that's kind of been shuffled under the rug. I'd like to know a lot more about that. That's a big deal when hundreds of people are wounded and 50, 60 killed in Las Vegas, of all places. I mean, they
And the
kind of,
implausibility of some of the things, like that he removed these hurricane windows from his hotel room. Like how do you do that?
yeah, it's, you do this stuff. Hey, wait a minute. I thought that's where CSI Las Vegas was. Why didn't they just send those actors by to determine what really happened?
They would have done a better job of
They would
investigating
have
it.
done a much better job finding out what really was going on there.
Yeah, and this
Anyway,
led to Trump banning bump stocks, if you remember.
right. Yeah. Anyway, nothing to see here, folks. Drive on. The other thing is that in this day in 1987, Reagan visited Berlin and gave his speech that started out Mr. Gorbachev or ended Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And I thought that was significant, coming as close as it was to the end of the Soviet Empire. But I think it shows the importance of psychological warfare, where you come out and declare the obvious. Mr. Tear down this wall. And it kind of resonated because the wall had been up since the 60s. But here Reagan asked Gorbachev to take the wall down. And of course, we have our own, or we might someday have our own wall on the southern border, but that's a wall to keep people out as opposed to keep people in. But walls can work both ways in any event. So.
Yeah, I think if it finally ever gets built, I think it'll be a bigger concern about people getting out than people getting in.
Well, we always have the Canadian border. It's going to be pretty hard to wall off the Canadian border. So anyway, then in 1924, on this day, George Herbert Walker Bush was born. And I don't think there's any reason to pay attention or celebrate that fact. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he was just a nothing guy. But it's indicative that because, well, one thing that's important about H.W. Bush is that he was the first ex-director of the CIA that became the president. It's kind of suspicious. But his son, the baby Bush, was later elected. And this got me thinking, you know, Americans, unfortunately, have a history of electing political families. And maybe it started with the Adams, John Adams, and then was it his cousin or his nephew, John Quincy Adams? And then, of course, we have the Kennedys. And before them, we had the Roosevelts, Teddy, FDR. And who else am I forgetting about? Well, you've got people that are related with politics and media, like the Cuomos, for instance. And I think I'm forgetting a bunch of
There's
boys.
even the Rockefellers, you know, they had a governor of New York, a vice president, and a senator.
Yeah, the Rockefellers would be another example of that.
The Roosevelts.
Yeah. So this isn't a good, I don't think this is a good look for a so-called democracy where people that are in political families and are generally pretty wealthy or become very wealthy after they're in politics anyway, put up. And of course, the sons and daughters of these people, I can't think of any examples now, but there are quite a few where they all mate with each other. So the deep state really exists. Then the last thing I came up with was that on this day in 1898, the Philippines declared independence from Spain. And that was precipitated by the Spanish-American War. I guess the Filipinos, Aguinaldo was their hero from that point of view, took that opportunity to declare war, to declare independence from Spain. They thought, oh, this is hunky-dory. Now we're going to be an independent country. But they didn't think that the Americans would simply want to step in where the Spanish were. And the Philippines became, in effect, an American colony, taking it over from being a Spanish colony. And in order to maintain it as an American colony, we sent in the Marines. And people don't talk about this, but there were a very large number of Filipinos that got killed, like 20,000 or more, maybe many more, maintaining our sovereignty over the Philippines. And they thought they were independent after they got rid of the Spanish.
Yeah, not so much. I'm pretty sure that Smedley Butler, who we've talked about before, was involved in that as well. He was everywhere, it seems, in that period of time.
I'm sure it all disgusted him. One of the interesting upshots from the Philippine war that we had uh, was the U.S. adopted the M1911 45 caliber semi-automatic pistol
Hmm.
because the Hucks, who were basically uh, they've called them something else since then. Anyway, they were Muslims, basically in Mindanao and the Southern Islands, would wrap themselves with heavy materials. And when they'd attack American positions, uh, they couldn't be stopped with the 38 caliber revolvers that Americans were using at the time. So it was determined we need a more powerful handgun. And so the M1911 came out as a direct consequence of, I understand, our war against the Hucks in the Philippines.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I was just checking. It said their estimates on the deaths of Filipinos during that period were the combatants. They say between 20 and 200,000. Um, and they say that
That's quite a
total.
range.
Well, yeah, well, they always are like this, right? Well, I mean, we always see these, but they say that there could be an estimate of there's an estimate of up to 1 million civilian deaths in total due to violence, famine, and disease, all that happened because of that whole thing.
Wow. So the Filipinos shouldn't have declared independence from Spain or should have just knuckled under when the Americans decided to take over from Spain. Those are huge numbers. 20,000 minimum, maybe 200,000. That's a big difference. And 1 million uh, other,
Millions.
yeah, this is huge.
Yeah, I mean, well, I read some accounts of some of the conflict there, and they were just brutal. I mean, they'd go into villages, and it's just unbelievable the violence. I mean, it made like people sick. The Marines to participate in it, they would describe as just awful, unbelievably awful. So I don't know.
So, I hate to say bad things about what America's done in the past, but we didn't always spread sweetness and light. And the problem is when we send our armies to foreign countries.
What do you expect? I mean, the military kills people and breaks things. That's what they do. So if you send them away, that's what they're there for.
Yeah, especially when you're sending basically heavily armed teenagers that haven't thought out life's problems very thoroughly. And that's basically who the soldiers are. So,
Yeah.
nothing against US soldiers. It happens with all soldiers from all countries when they go to a foreign country with a different culture.
Yeah. 100%.
But those are
So some
huge numbers in the Philippines, huge numbers, unbelievable number. Well, believable. Just I hate to the words incredible and unbelievable are used way too promiscuously because it means I can't believe this. Well, believe it.
Yeah, they were trying to, the Americans had the hope of curing the Filipinos as part of this fight, curing them of their I don't know, of their village ways, their uncivilized ways, I guess.
Yeah, and I think even to this day, there's a big difference between the northern Philippines, which are Christians, and the southern Philippines, Mindanao and close by islands that are Muslims. And having, it seems to me that the people in the north are quite affable and friendly to foreigners, just my impression from having been there a few times. And in the south, there's still a lot of hostility. It just seemed that way to me uh, from the Muslims. So these traditions last generations, especially in these somewhat backward countries.
Hmm. Yeah.
Actually, the Philippines ought to be at least two different countries, is what I'm saying. Southern
Hmm.
Philippines is really part of Indonesia.
Makes sense. Okay, well, some recent news items. What's your uh, the justice system seems to be rolling forward. Obviously, we had Trump convicted. Now we have Hunter Biden convicted. What do you think of Hunter's situation?
Well, it's a gun charge. And I don't think you should, when you're buying a gun, I don't know how many of our listeners will think this is outrageous or not believe it, that I don't think you should be licensed or qualified or have to ask or answer any questions if you want to buy a gun. Uh, the right to defend yourself is basic to any free human being. And uh, owning a gun, therefore, I mean, you're either a free man who can arm and defend himself, or you're a slave or a serf who's not allowed to. And it doesn't matter what the reason is, because you drink too much, or you have drunk too much, or you use some drugs. Well, which drugs? Is marijuana okay? Or how about methamphetamines? Are they okay? Well, German soldiers during World War II were full of methamphetamines. Did that make them? This is all crazy. I mean, the question is, anybody should be able to own a gun. If you use a gun stupidly or in a criminal manner, well, then you pay the consequences. But anybody should be able to own a gun, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I read something on Twitter. It was supposedly a response from Trump about the conviction. And it was like, I was just looking for it. I couldn't find it now, but he was saying that what did he say exactly? Something that he thought that Americans should have a right to own a gun, and something like he thought that being convicted on that was something that his dad should correct it, but he probably won't. And so Trump said he would do it when he was in office.
Well, and in addition to that, the fact that just for lying on a government form, Hunter could get up to 25 years in jail and was it $250,000 in fines just for lying on a government form? I mean, this is crazy, actually.
Yeah, especially when there are, this is another thing. He's convicted of that, but there's all kinds of other crimes that he's associated with that are much more serious. Whether they be, I mean, how about corruption with Ukraine or with China or something like that, where they took all the kickbacks from the government, that his dad got. I mean, if you're going to get him on something, how about getting him something that's actually a real crime?
Yeah, it's pretty much like Bill Clinton having been tried in the Senate for a dalliance with Monica Lewinsky when uh, yeah, there are dozens of people that died of suicide in and around him and Hillary.
Yeah, or war crimes. What about bombing Yugoslavia? Or the aspirin factory in Sudan that he blew up? Like, what about things like that?
Yeah, instead they use a legalism, a dally with an intern, and it's crazy. And then of course other government officials lie to Congress all the time, like these people in the intelligence community. That sounds so friendly when you have a community. Like who am I talking?
That NSA chief who talked about the
Clapper and
yeah, Clapper.
all the rest of them. I mean, these are hardcore criminals. They lied, they got off, nobody cares. So it's all completely arbitrary. And it really discredits the whole nature of the law. There's so many laws, and they're interpreted so arbitrarily, depending on who the person is and who's prosecuting them. It's all bullshit.
Yeah, it seems like the only times people get prosecuted for something, it's things that score political points, but do not address any actual malfeasance that's happening at the state level. It's
Yeah.
just all, nothing important gets prosecuted. It's just these trivial matters that give people, everyone was like, Republicans were very happy about Hunter being, convicted. They just like Democrats were very happy, ecstatic really about Trump being convicted.
Yeah, it's not a question of principles at all. It's a question of distracting the hoi polloi. It's really quite disgusting. And of course, the biggest one is what they're doing to Trump right now, which is unbelievably egregious.
It is. It is. Um, what do you think about, we talked a little bit about bird flu recently, and I mean, I just keep bringing it up with you because it seems to me that there is something going on with it, with them. It's being pushed in a way that, defies logic. And I don't know. I mean, like, for instance, the EU announced yesterday that they're going to buy 40 million doses of a bird flu vaccine. There's this a doctor that was making the rounds talking about how dangerous it was for people to drink raw milk because, could possibly be consuming the bird flu virus. They're reporting these cases that are out there. I don't know. What do you think's really going on with it, or is it just going to be a nothing burger in the end?
No, it's part of that thing. Uh, it's part of the process that Yuri Bezimov was talking about. You've got to demoralize the population, then destabilize them, and then you build up to a crisis. And uh, the good guys, well, they think they're the good guys, win and change the whole nature of society. So that's part of what's going on. It's people can't believe in anything. They can't believe in they can't believe in the purity of their milk. It almost relates back to General Jack D. Ripper's thoughts in Dr. Strangelove. Children's ice cream, Mandrake. They're poisoning children's ice cream. So it's pretty much that same thing. And it's part of the saying that who was it? Is it Bill Gates that was saying that cattle are our biggest enemy when it comes to global warming? This is completely insane. It's off the wall. I mean, does that mean when the US was covered with buffalo, which it was in the last century or century before last, that global warming was a problem because the buffalo, who greatly outnumber the cattle, forget about all the elk and the deer, same thing. These people are nuts.
They are, but I think they're serious, about this. And it seems like whereas COVID was targeting the population, it seems to me that the fundamental target of this is the food supply. And there isn't the built-in resistance people might have at this point to be like, oh, I'm not going to go with this bird flu nonsense. I'm not going to go with it. Like they won't convince me to get vaccinated. I don't even think they're going to try. I think instead they're going right after the food supply. And it is convenient though that bird flu seems to mostly affect cattle. That's the biggest concern is cattle, which is Bill Gates' target.
It's unbelievable to me how easily people are influenced by mass hysteria. Mass hysteria spreads as rapidly as a virus itself does. Like the word went out that you have to stay 6 feet from another person. And when you think about it, that's insane. I mean, your breath and cover with a mask, which is like trying to keep mosquitoes out through a chain link fence. I mean, it's all crazy, but everybody took up the. So who knows what's going to be next?
Yeah, but it does seem like it's not nothing to me. It does. They're just because it's got that kind of sort of that coordinated propaganda campaign that we saw with COVID, where it's not just limited to, one nation, that's happening in lots of places with the EU and, the US at the same time, also Australia. So it seems as though they're rolling out a new campaign that is part of the destabilization effort, I think.
The one thing that really surprises me is that here we are at the doorstep of summer, which is June 21, June 22, and there haven't been any mass riots, any real upsets so far in the city. I'm rather surprised considering that no matter who wins in this upcoming election, half the country is going to be bitterly unhappy.
Hmm. Yeah, we need a catalyst. I mean, there were some protests outside of the White House again related to, Hamas or the Palestinian cause, I guess, just a few days ago. But just a
Yeah,
1 day thing, no big deal.
1,000, 2,000 people or something like that. That's not a big deal. So I don't know what they've got in store for us or what the psychology of people at large have in store for us. They don't even know themselves.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing I want to talk to you about was just an update on the Russia-Ukraine situation, because I know you are on some weekly calls with some military experts who have a perspective on what's happening right now and kind of how it's pretty serious. There's some red lines.
Yeah, some of these guys are really very concerned. Having spent a lot of recent time in Russia and talked to high Russian officials, uh, and the bottom line is that the Russians are really serious. They're not bluffing. They're not just goofing around. That if they feel that Russia is really under attack by the West, they feel that the West is actually trying to overthrow Russia and do bad things to it. And they've drawn lines in the sand. And if the West goes beyond those lines, they will counterattack. So, what exactly are the lines that the Russians have drawn in the sand? Well, one of them is serious attacks within Russia itself. They will counterattack, whether it's in France or Britain or the US. And then things can spin really out of control. The other thing that these guys are worried about, and these are thoughtful guys that are knowledgeable, that get the information they have firsthand as opposed to picking things up from listening to television programs, is that the Russians are very concerned and flummoxed about the fact that they cannot communicate with the Americans. In other words, diplomacy seems to have broken down. They can't sit down and talk with high up American officials because the American officials don't make themselves available to talk to them about how can we solve this problem? How can we de-escalate it? How can we make sure that something doesn't happen, that nuclear weapons are used, and then bigger nuclear weapons, because tit for tat, this type of thing. So they're really concerned about the fact that the Americans are not talking to them, which impresses me as really insane. If you want to solve the problem, you've got to communicate with the other party.
Which implies there's no interest in solving the problem, or that there's a
Because,
perception that this isn't a problem.
yeah, so what this means is, are we really looking at actual World War III? I mean, hopefully it's not with hundreds of intercontinental ballistic missiles being launched, attacking major cities, but something that really looks like World War III seems like it's on the way.
So it's yeah, and it's the one of the big things is the introduction of F-16s into the battle, where there's been a lot of NATO countries that have contributed F-16s to Ukraine. Supposedly, they're getting Ukrainian pilots all trained, and that they should be in use fairly soon. And I think that's a very provocative for the Russians.
Yeah, because F-16s are nuclear weapons capable. And this is of great concern to the Russians because they feel like they're the enemy. They're under attack. And it's perverse because as I look at it, the various people that are running the world today, the most thoughtful, measured, intelligent, knowledgeable head of state out there is actually the devil incarnate, Vladimir Putin, at this point.
Yes. What do you think about the Russian Navy being off the coast of the U.S. and going on its visit to Cuba? Is that a big deal?
Well, the Russian Navy has always showed up in Cuba since Castro took over. Maybe they're going to show up now in Venezuela since Maduro is in charge. But at this point, showing up now while we have a crisis going on and a hot war with American lookalikes fighting in the Ukraine, and there actually are supposed to be a good number of American soldiers that are not identified as that. They're not there in unit strength, but they're there as trainers. So the fact that the Russian fleet is showing up in the Caribbean is counterprovocative. So, okay, tit for tat. All right, you do that. Now, what's the U.S. going to do to show that they're tough guys and anything can happen? This thing
Right.
really should be de-escalated, which the Russians want to do, but they won't let them.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think there's any. It seems they do talk openly about taking out Putin. They have for a long time, so it does seem, but the talk of this, well, Lindsey Graham, this last Sunday on, I don't know if you saw this little bit he did on one of the Sunday news programs, but he talked specifically, not saying about defending democracy and freedom and all that stuff. He actually went more to the point, which is that there are trillions of dollars of resources in Ukraine, and we cannot let Russia have them to give them to China.
I know there's trillions of dollars of resources in every country. Do you remember when we were still in Afghanistan and somebody put out the meme that in Afghanistan there are $3 trillion worth of, I
Rare
forget what,
earths.
yeah, rare earths. Like anybody's going to go there and try to mine it under those circumstances. Yeah, it's and Lindsey Graham, what a completely disgusting, despicable little poofter he is. I'd like to put, hey, if he wants the war, then he ought to invite Putin to a cage fight. Just, well,
That'd be entertaining. It'd be over quickly, I think, though.
I think it'd be over very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's pretty crazy though, this whole idea that even that's supposed to be a compelling case. And it's like it's this game theory type thinking. We have to control those resources so that China doesn't get them. It's just this is the kind of thinking that ends up destroying civilizations, that you have to just oppose this enemy and you don't want them to have something.
Anyway, they're not assuming, I don't know how they get this number of $12 trillion, but assuming it's even remotely true, it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to whoever owns the land in the Ukraine. It's point number one that's being overlooked. And Russia is the largest country in the world with hundreds of trillions of dollars, maybe quadrillions of dollars. Who knows? I mean, this is such a ridiculous concept of unexploited resources. The last thing they need is more land where, if they succeed in conquering the Ukraine or conquering some other place, what they've got, if not an actual hot war, they've got a guerrilla war with the local people. I mean, it's pointless. It's completely pointless.
It is. It is. Well, yeah, I don't know. But it does seem to be escalating, and it doesn't seem like there's any way out until it somehow crosses to a point where all of a sudden U.S. diplomats decide to pick up a phone and talk about it. But until they're working on something, I think they're just moving forward. And I saw Peter Zeihan on David Lynn's show yesterday. You should watch it because it's very funny. Peter Zeihan has a very strange view of the world. And he's like, Russia red lines? Oh, they've had red lines before. We just tiptoe up to them and cross them. We're going to do that again. He's so crazy.
Certainly one of the most stupid commentators out there, but people take him seriously. I don't know why, but I guess because he's a very good promoter.
Yeah, and he's very confident in his views. So, the confidence he exudes makes you think this guy must know what he's talking about.
Certainty. People want certainty, even if you're batshit fucking crazy.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. We'll be back on Friday with questions from members of the file. So if you would like to ask Doug a question, you can subscribe to Crisis Investing at crisisinvesting.com and ask your questions there. So until then, Doug, thank you very much.
Same to you, Matt. Thanks.